There was a time when the royal House of Windsor had everything a dynasty could desire. In 1991, Britain had helped secure peace after the Gulf War conflict. The ceremony of trooping the colour had a sense of victory over the dark forces of aggression. But for the Queen, the next conflict would be fought uncomfortably closer to home. Princess Diana had done more than provide the next royal generation. She had given a new vitality to an aging institution. She looked certain to complete the Queen Mother's task of taking a popular family monarchy into the 21st century. Under the impressive facade of royalty on parade, there were dangerous tensions which would shatter the image of the monarchy. No one foresaw then that within a few troubled years, Princess Diana, once the future Queen, would be divorced, stripped of her royal title, and die tragically. The summer of 1991 would be the last time the royal family would all appear together publicly. Within a year, both the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of York would be removed from the royal fold. Diana had married too young. At only 20, she had been unable to cope with the royal system. Sarah, the Duchess of York, worldly wise at 26, fared little better. She too would be divorced and lose her title. As mother of a future king, Diana's isolation created confusion. A princess alone cut adrift from the royal family. Like Diana, Fergie had absorbed their morals and their ethos. She expected protection, but her indiscretions were cruelly exposed. Diana found affection and the love her husband could not give her in other people and in other ways. Her unique empathy with the public set her apart from her husband's family. Her warmth and compassion for the forgotten and dispossessed made her an icon of caring in a selfish age. Her beauty and magnetism created jealousy among the royal family. Her popularity caused rivalry with her husband. Behind her duties, Diana hid her unhappiness, her illness, and her secret life. Hidden from her adoring public, Diana's private life was known only in royal and society circles. Older members of the royal family, with their love of pomp, pageantry and position, seemed blissfully undisturbed by Diana's personal problems.
Well, of course, as the first person to speak the truth about Diana and to write about her as she really was, and to see that this was a multifaceted woman with many contradictions and someone who was pulling in many different directions, I haven't been surprised at what has happened in the last 5 years. In the paperback edition of Diana in Private, I recount a conversation that took place at Windsor between the Prince and Princess of Wales and the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, where Diana was warned if she pushed for a separation, she would inevitably get a divorce, that the result would be she would be marginalised. Diana and I didn't speak for 3 years after that book came out. Eventually, when we spoke, she said to me, "You were right." She said, "I didn't believe you at the time, but you were right."
The sourness of Diana's relationship with Charles was exposed to the world during an official tour of Korea in 1992. Their visit created such embarrassment that Britain had to apologise to the host nation. The royal couple continued this official union until the poisonous atmosphere could no longer be disguised.
Diana's marriage and the relations between her and Prince Charles really presented the royal family with an almost insoluble problem.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with
Charles
regret,
insisted on a formal separation announced by Prime Minister John Major in the House of Commons. Major said that Diana could still become Queen.
are unaffected.
Got up in the House of Commons and said, this does not affect the whole series of things. It doesn't affect Charles's position as future head of the church. It doesn't affect Diana's future position as Queen of England. And everybody said, come off it, John. You're pretty implausible most of the time, but this is totally rubbish. I think once actually the extent of the rift between the two of them had become public knowledge, once both of them, both Diana and Charles, had started a public competition for favour, which inevitably amounted also to blaming the other, were competitions for public favour. Once that's happened, you couldn't possibly have the two of them remaining married. And again, if they had remained married, the question would have been, first of all, everybody would have said, this is a sham. And the second thing they would have said is, but how can she possibly be queen?
In 1993, Diana made her last official visit to Wales as their princess. As usual, her pulling power was immense. An expectant crowd, including the press, waited for the royal convoy to arrive. Diana knew instinctively that her popularity with both the public and press gave her a power base and a trump card to match the power of the royal system. For years, she fought the courtiers who effectively controlled the monarchy. Immensely photogenic, she liked publicity and used it to her own advantage.
Diana invented a new art form. In the beginning, we used to describe her as the last silent film star. That was nowhere near the truth. Diana was not very good on television. What she was brilliant at was posing for popular newspapers, for the tabloids. And she invents this new art form, which is really, look at it, I mean, some of the most famous images we have, Diana outside the Taj Mahal. I mean, it's Greta Garbo, I Want to Be Alone. Or the famous scene in Seoul, in Korea, where she's pulling away from Prince Charles, and the use she always makes of her eyes, those great, heavy, cold eyes, and the look going up there. What she's doing, she is posing for a picture, which she knows will have a tabloid headline written over it.
There were times when the acting gave way to real emotion, her performance unable to contain the real turbulence within. During the summer of 1992, Diana's secret sorrows became public dramas, following the revelations about her private life. During a speech at a hospice in Liverpool, her composure broke as she fought back tears.
In all that you do, you reflect so very sincerely the philosophy of tender, loving care, which is and always will be the hallmark of this hospice.
Gathering her composure, Diana reached out to her adoring public for their support and understanding. Her emotional breakdown was due to the publication of a sensational book claiming to be the true story of her life and exposing her suffering within her marriage. Its author confirmed his story on television.
The tears that she's shed in public in Liverpool are as nothing compared to the tears that she shed over the last year. I can't emphasise strongly enough the volatility of the situation inside Kensington Palace.
Her husband's uncaring attitude, his unfaithfulness, and the coldness of the royal household were disclosed in candid detail. The book revealed her cries for help, her suicide attempts, and her eating disorders.
There are a number of sources for the suicide attempt. Some of the sources are off the record, in tape-recorded interviews. And on each occasion, when I was quizzing the people about these suicide attempts, I asked them, who told you? And the answer came back on each occasion, the Princess of Wales.
Despite the publicity created by the revelations of an unhappy marriage, Diana continued with her royal duties. Outwardly, their marriage still appeared to be in good shape, but behind the scenes, forces were at work to discredit her. Diana knew that her husband's friends were making her out to be unbalanced, and plans were made to expose her as an adulteress. A personal and sensitive phone call with a male friend who called Diana Squidgy had been intercepted, and the tape sent mysteriously to a newspaper. Labelled by the press as the Squidgygate tapes, they were published in August 1992. James Gilby, who is a named source in Andrew Morton's book, was revealed as Diana's confidant.
It's just so difficult, so complicated. It makes my life real torture, I've decided.
Diana's friends retaliated by publicly exposing Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles as Charles's long-term mistress. Sometime after her first public appearance at a polo match attended by the Queen in June 1992, an intimate telephone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked to the newspapers.
One way along with, if you know what I mean.
I knew it would revive me. I can't bear a Sunday night without you.
Oh, God.
Later, in a television interview, Charles admitted that he and Camilla had been lovers since 1986. They met regularly at her farmhouse in the country. Diana was not slow to realise how important the tapes were in her battle with Charles.
Once Diana had the tape, she is supposed to have tried to use it as leverage to get a separation, because she wanted a separation. Not that by then she was so unhappy with the Prince of Wales, but she was unhappy with the courtiers running her life. Well, once they knew of the existence of the tape, these very courtiers spun around and taped her with her lover at the time, who was James Gilby, to really stymie her and have a quid pro quo situation whereby she would not be able to use the tape to damage the Prince of Wales. Diana certainly believed that she was not accidentally taped, and I know this from her personally.
On the other side of the world, in New York, the disgraced Duchess of York hoped to resolve her problems by earning enough money to pay off her mountainous debts. Her mother-in-law, the Queen, cleared some of the overdraft accumulated during Fergie's brief spell as a royal wife, but further debts had arisen thanks to the Duchess's high spending. Money and men were the twin sources of Fergie's fall from grace. She hoped her royal connections would sell her literary endeavours.
What we've seen actually in the British royal family is farce and tragedy being played out simultaneously. Diana is the tragedy. Poor Fergie is the farce.
Palace officials viewed Diana and Fergie as a continuing danger to royal stability. But unlike Charles, Prince Andrew behaved with great civility to his estranged wife, believing that the happiness of their young daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, came first. Fergie's downfall was prompted by her love for rich, handsome Americans. First there was the dashing Texan Steve Wyatt, then his friend Johnny Bryan followed. Bryan had claimed that he was an honest broker helping Fergie with her marital and financial problems. The papers told a different story. The indiscretions of previous royal generations had been covered up. Fergie found, like Diana, that hers were exposed. She blamed the publication of these photos and earlier ones with Wyatt on her enemies, the grey men within the palace.
Now, she obviously did quite a lot of damage to the monarchy, or to the family monarchy, but it was always limited by the fact that nobody ever took her very seriously, did they? I mean, you remember it was Lord Charteris, wasn't it, who, when he was asked for his opinion, terribly patrician disdain, sat up there, looked over his half-moon spectacles, said, vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. And I think we all felt that she was vulgar, vulgar, vulgar. The difficulty with her was ever to imagine that this hooray Henrietta was actually Duchess of York and called her Royal Highness and curtsy to her. She was so improbable. Actually, I have a very, very soft spot for Fergie. I think that with all her vulgarity, and all her crassness, she was actually quite an honest, go-getting girl. I also think she was never malicious. She never tried to damage the monarchy. She never tried to damage her husband. And in that sense, there is quite an instructive contrast with Diana. I mean, Diana, for all her virtues, was very vindictive. She went out of her way to damage Charles as much as possible. There was also an element of vindictiveness directed against the royal family. You know, this attack so public in the Morton book on the family firm. Now, Fergie was never guilty of that. She was just preposterous, poor dear.
The royal family were on holiday at Balmoral when the pictures were published of Fergie on holiday with her lover Johnny Bryan. The Queen could not forgive her daughter-in-law's reckless behaviour. Rather than endure the looks and whispers over her topless frolics with Johnny Bryan, Fergie fled from the royal holiday home in Scotland. She was subsequently banned from royal events. Meanwhile, in Balmoral, it was family business as usual, with the royals attending their church service. Diana and Fergie had plotted to leave the royal family together. In the event, Diana held back. Humiliated, Fergie went back to a rented home and life as a single mother. She had been cast out in the cold by her husband's family. Fergie floundered from one house to another, one unsuitable man to the next, one wild scheme to a worse one, consulting fortune tellers over her prospects. Meanwhile, the royal band played on. Triumphal processions were a sign of a dynasty that looked to the past, to distant times when monarchs had awesome power over troublesome wives. Outwardly undisturbed by the antics of her eldest sons and their wives, the Queen perhaps drew consolation from her ancestors. But Diana and Fergie may not have fared well in Henry VIII's day. His divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, who failed to bear him a son, caused a breach within the Catholic Church of Rome. She was expelled from the royal court.
He hounded her literally to death by moving her to a series of unhealthy houses. And in the 16th century, an unhealthy house was quite easy to find. He bombarded her with demands, he took away her jewels, he really terrorized her.
The grim Tower of London faced those who fell foul of Henry. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, was executed there for her adultery, an act of high treason in those days.
A swordsman was sent for from France to execute her with a sword rather than having her done in with an axe, which was the way common people had their heads chopped off. I mean, the result was the same, but there was a little bit more honour in it.
But later, the Prince Regent's battle with his wife Caroline of Brunswick was lost when the House of Lords refused him a bill of divorce.
She was an outrageous tart, you can imagine. I mean, she was promiscuous, she was exhibitionist, she did everything to shock and make a damn fool of herself. You know, and she was fortunately abroad for most of the time, and George IV, when Prince Regent, simply wanted to get rid of her, and considering some of the things she did, like going around in short skirts in an open carriage with a younger man in Italy, one can't blame him. Not that he was a paragon of virtue himself, of course, but he did have a position to keep up.
Queen Victoria, founder of most of Europe's royal dynasties through marriage to her cousin Prince Albert, had 9 children and provided a perfect model of family values.
One of the things that's very important to understand about our current royal family, they're of course really the Hanoverian royal house, the German royal house, and they seem to have always had, how can I put it tactfully, a very healthy sexual appetite. One doesn't normally think of Victoria, you know, with her famous "we are not amused," as a highly sexed woman, but there's no doubt about it. She hated actually having children. She hated the whole process of giving birth, and who wouldn't under Victorian conditions. So of course, she was one of the early people to give birth with anaesthetic, with doses of chloroform. But the night after her wedding, in other words, her marriage night, her descriptions of that, her enthusiasm, her passion, is quite extraordinary.
Victoria's son, King Edward VII, had a lifetime of pleasure with a series of mistresses, most notably with Mrs. Alice Keppel. Then there was Daisy, Countess of Warwick, and the actress Lily Langtry.
the man with so many mistresses that there were allegedly sort of rules as to how the mistress should behave, and one of them sort of explained how a mistress was supposed to behave, that you curtsied first, called him sir, and then jumped into bed.
Queen Alexandra tolerated her husband's infidelities.
Great-grandfather King Edward VII, Victoria's son, when Prince of Wales, notoriously had many affairs and continued to after becoming king. This, of course, was in a different age when his wife did shut up and look the other way and was very long-suffering and kind enough to invite his favourite mistress to see him on his deathbed. And that favourite mistress, Mrs. Alice Keppel, just happens to be the great-grandmother of Mrs. Camilla Parker Bowles, as Camilla reputedly reminded the prince on one of their first meetings. My great-grandmother was your great-great-grandfather's mistress. How about it, then? She supposedly said to him.
Edward's son, King George V, and his wife Mary preferred Victoria's family values.
What happened, though, in the beginning of the 20th century with George V and Queen Mary was that there was a decision that the monarchy should adapt itself to democracy. What we're going to do, we're going to symbolise the one thing that all our people have in common. Now, the thing that everybody had in common until the 1960s was family. You all belonged to a family, you were a product of a family, you were all going to get married. Very few people didn't get married and so on. And the House of Windsor did this, and it did it extraordinarily successfully. Very, very successfully embodied typical middle-class bourgeois family values. It was a bourgeois monarchy. Now, there are always exceptions. There was the exception, of course, of Edward VIII, who was driven from the throne because he wouldn't fulfil this particular set of values.
George V and Queen Mary were cold and distant parents to their 6 children. The eldest, David, was a handsome golden child with enviable charisma. His upbringing concentrated on protocol. In adult life, he rebelled against his parents' repression. It was during the First World War when, as a young officer, he was subjected to a major encounter with the opposite sex.
Edward VIII is first introduced to sex when his equerries decide that, he's whatever he is. I can't even remember his age, but relatively elderly, not to have had sex. They decide this really must stop. So they give him I think it's just outside Amiens in the First World War. They give him a jolly good dinner with a great deal of wine, and then a nice, sympathetic French prostitute, if I remember correctly, called Paulette, is found, who gives him ecstasy for the evening. And then he writes this letter afterwards, never been interested in it before, now I can't get enough. And he is then never out of love and never out of sex. So I think we need to see this as a highly charged family, which of course I suppose shows you just what problems enacting the role of the family monarchy actually presents in terms of the suppression and the control of desires.
Thelma Furness was one of his married lovers. Frida Dudley was another. They all lost out to twice-married Wallis Simpson.
King Edward VIII had a succession of relationships when he was a single man, always with married ladies, always with married ladies. He always believed that it was safer to have a relationship, have an affair with a married woman, because she had a commitment elsewhere. She had as much to lose, perhaps, as he did.
Edward VIII chose married women because they were safe. He liked mature women. He liked the comforts of home. He didn't like silly girls. He wanted a woman, and a woman who would provide him with a home life. He felt that he'd never had a home life with his parents. He used to say Queen Mary, his mother, was very cold, and he was terrified of King George V. So he felt he'd never had a home life, and he wanted a home life. And the way to get a home life was to be a part of a family, which is what he had when he had his mistresses.
In 1936, David, by then King Edward VIII, gave up the throne for the woman he loved and became Duke of Windsor. They married the following year and never returned to live again in Britain.
All hated her. They thought that she had stolen the king. She had made him lose his crown. They all thought she was a terrible adventuress. They all thought she was simply out of the position. And what they all thought was that once she had got him, once she had married him and wasn't the Queen, that she would ditch him as she had ditched two other husbands. They assumed she was simply an adventuress who was after the throne, and once she didn't get it, that she would clear off. That fact didn't happen, but that is why they thought she was just a good time girl, is what they thought she was.
After their marriage, the couple lived in France in a villa in Paris. The Duke was always resentful that after their marriage, his wife was not made a royal highness.
Well, he thought that she was absolutely worthy of it. He thought that this is the least he could do. If he couldn't make her queen, and he was determined at one stage that she would be queen, and she was determined to be queen, the least that he could do for her was to make her a royal highness, and this is what he spent really his whole life battling for. This is the one supreme battle of his life. More important than anything was to make her a royal highness, a battle, of course, which he never won.
The royal family's attitude to divorce and remarriage was severely tested in December 1992, when the Queen allowed her divorced daughter, Princess Anne, to remarry. Charles and Andrew had both separated from their wives that year, Charles only 3 days before he attended this wedding. The quiet ceremony in Balmoral's tiny church marked a triumph for Anne. By marrying in Scotland, she had escaped the opposition of the Church of England to the remarriage of a royal divorcee. The 42-year-old princess had shaken off the scandal surrounding the discovery of love letters from her new husband, Tim Lawrence, then an equerry to the Queen. The combination of palace protection for a princess of the royal house and her own capacity for a heavy workload ensured a smooth transition. Anne's indiscretions were all forgotten. Tim, a naval officer, was welcomed into the family he had once served. On that occasion in Scotland, Princess Anne's grandmother, Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, must have recalled her own wedding in 1923. She had been hand-picked by Queen Mary as a bride for the diffident Prince Albert, known as Bertie. The daughter of the Scottish Earl of Strathmore, Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was regarded as a commoner, but Queen Mary found her eminently suitable. Bertie became George VI after his brother abdicated to marry Mrs. Simpson. He called his family the Firm. Their children, Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret, were attractive, unspoilt girls, close to their parents, the image of the ideal family. In 1948, Princess Margaret fell for the King's equerry, Group Captain Peter Townsend. Sadly, her love was in vain. A divorcee, he was barred from remarriage in the eyes of the Church.
The Queen's sister, so close to the throne, marrying a divorced person wasn't on. Not in the moral climate of the time, just after the war.
Years after Townsend's departure, Margaret married society photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones, newly ennobled as Lord Snowdon. The marriage began with great hopes, but the couple may have been temperamentally unsuited. Margaret was the Diana of her day and never off the front pages, particularly when she was romantically involved with a younger man, Roddy Llewellyn.
She was quite a sexy, attractive girl. I don't see any reason why she shouldn't have lovers. She's got this nice, quiet little island in Mystique. A lot of people would like to be very close to Princess Margaret because she's royal, because she's glamorous, because she's famous. And a lot of young men, probably young men, would want to become her lover, I would say, and she's had a few.
Princess Margaret survived the scandal of her divorce in 1978. Years later, she carries out her royal duties with resignation and royal decorum. But Margaret is sometimes seen as a difficult, even arrogant woman.
Princess Margaret has not really been a very sympathetic personality because she's never really known how to play the princess role in terms of friendship. You know, one minute she's very down to earth and very much the way Diana could be, where people would call Diana Diana and she wouldn't mind. Well, Princess Margaret minded. Princess Margaret minded awfully if people called her Margaret. So, you know, she'd be so relaxed with them and allow them to be so relaxed with her that they would take it to the ultimate and obvious conclusion of treating her completely as if she were a human being without royal status, at which point she would clamp down and remind them that she was the Queen's sister, and, you know, that she was ma'am, and that, so, you know, she's gone through her whole life with many people who are genuinely fond of her calling her ma'am darling. Well, I mean, that's ridiculous.
Older royals can recall times when their private behaviour was concealed within great houses, among aristocratic friends, and kept secret from the public. One of those mansions was Broadlands, the elegant former home of Lord Mountbatten. It was bought by his beautiful and wealthy wife, Edwina.
Edwina Mountbatten made Fergie look like the sweetest, most innocent baby. She was promiscuous, she was sexually avaricious, she was bisexual, she was wildly indiscreet. She didn't care who knew what she was up to, as long as she was gratified. Her marriage to Lord Louis Mountbatten survived for the very simple reason that Edwina Ashley, as she was one of the greatest heiresses of her time. And he, who was a son of Prince Louis of Battenberg, had no money at all. He also loved her. He genuinely did love her. He did not impinge upon her in any way. He allowed her absolute freedom, which she took. You know, she would put on her tiara and go to Buckingham Palace, and the following morning take off for India with a lover.
Broadlands in Hampshire has been an important retreat for the Queen and Prince Philip, who spent their honeymoon there. Prince Charles took Diana there in July 1981 to spend their wedding night. He knew the house well through his extreme closeness to Lord Mountbatten, the man he called his honorary grandfather. Always a little afraid of his own father, Prince Philip, Charles looked to the much-decorated war hero for manly guidance. Mountbatten was aware that Charles was shy about entertaining women under his mother's roof. He gave Charles advice about his love life and the need to keep secret liaison out of the papers. Mountbatten allowed him to use Broadlands as a love nest for his affairs with single girls and with married women. Among the married women was Camilla Parker Bowles. She came to dominate his life.
He would also have counselled Charles that if he was going to have a love affair with another woman, particularly a married woman, that it was going to be kept strictly, quietly, and strictly on the side. Mountbatten himself could be the most indiscreet of men, but where relationships were concerned, he could be ultra discreet, and he would have impressed upon Prince Charles and upon Diana the need for the utmost discretion, and he certainly wouldn't have allowed them, either of them, to have made the public confessions that they subsequently did.
In earlier times, royals kept their secrets. They expected deference from newspapers who kept silent over scandals. The new generation of royal women, particularly Diana and Fergie, emulated the marital behaviour of previous royals such as the parents of Princess Alexandra. Her father, the late Duke of Kent, was a son of George V. Known as Prince George, he married the beautiful Greek Princess Marina. A glamorous couple, they had many indiscretions.
In terms of what goes on nowadays, it wasn't really shocking. It was just sort of very human. You know, he had a coke problem, he was bisexual, had an affair with like Noel Coward, that sort of thing. Well, she was widowed very young, and she had a very healthy respect for masculine flesh and availed herself of it at every turn. The problem is, of course, that she lived by the rules of her day, which were that a married woman should usually have an affair with a married man. So there were many wives who absolutely loathed Princess Marina because she was busy leading their husbands by the nose, so to speak. But she never put her foot wrong publicly. She was always beautifully presented. She was a beautiful woman, beautifully turned out, always charming, always impeccably behaved in public. What she did in the privacy of her own bedroom was her business. And her children understand this and respect the fact that she had an absolute appreciation of royal decorum and never put a foot wrong.
Like Edwina Mountbatten and Princess Marina, Diana and Fergie expected their dangerous liaison to remain hidden behind the veneer of royal respectability. Diana remained loyal to the royal family up until the point where she felt threatened by Charles's friends and by the palace machinery of courtiers. Married in name only, in 1986 she had fallen in love with a young officer, James Hewitt. Their on-off affair lasted 5 years. She confessed their relationship during her 1995 Panorama television interview.
Did your relationship go beyond a close friendship?
Yes, it did. Yes.
Were you unfaithful?
Yes, I adored him. Yes, I was in love with him.
That interview, in which she questioned Charles's suitability to become king, shattered the uneasy peace she had held with the royal family since her 1992 separation. Her situation became untenable. The Queen demanded divorce.
I think Diana broke the mould of the monarchy really essentially because of personality. She was this extraordinary woman. We didn't think so at first, but she turned out to be this quite extraordinary woman. She had a certain kind of common touch, dare I use the word, a sort of vulgarity, which is essential in a popular institution in an age of mass democracy. There was something else too. It was her very unhappiness and the dreadfulness of the marriage, which she decided to treat in a very different way. She, of course, decided not to go quietly. She would tell all. Now, these two things, the vulgarity on the one hand and the determination to tell all on the other, ripped apart the two central themes of the 20th century British monarchy. She destroyed the great selling, if you like, the great advertising slogan of the British monarchy. The touch of vulgarity also did something else. This monarchy, which was a popular monarchy, a very successful monarchy, also depended on maintaining a distance, a certain remoteness. And she reached out, she cut through that, she broke it. So she broke both the etiquette and the slogan. It's hard to think of a more complete demolition job.
In India, Diana publicly humiliated her husband. Expecting a token kiss, Charles was rebuffed by a deft turn of Diana's head. This gesture brought the battle from the royal home out into the public arena.
I think there's no doubt at all that Charles and Diana were in appeal. They both behaved as though they were. They had their generals, they had their lieutenants, they had their plans of campaign, and there were famous battles, weren't there?
Diana's warhorse was a sleek limousine, her battle dress selected to upstage Charles, who foolishly admitted adultery with Camilla Parker Bowles during a televised interview.
There was this extraordinary moment when Diana turned up at the Serpentine Gallery, deliberately choosing the sort of art that Charles hated, wearing that dress, and you have never seen so much royal leg since the proxy marriages of the Middle Ages. When a princess was married by proxy in the Middle Ages, she was put naked into bed, whilst the visiting ambassador who was marrying her by proxy put his naked leg down beside her. Well, as I said, you've never seen so much royal leg since one of those things, that extraordinary split dress. It was magnificent.
Men and women were equally entranced by Diana's startling beauty and her powerful presence. She had learned every cosmetic and fashion trick to enhance her appearance. Against her dazzle, Charles looked dull and old-fashioned, too rooted in tradition. But Diana's death seems to have liberated him. Seen weeks after her funeral, Charles toured South Africa with Prince Harry. He seemed a new man. The burden of rivalry was gone.
he also found himself in a completely no-winning situation. Everyone's noted how his own behaviour seems to have transformed since Diana's death, how much more outgoing, how much more relaxed. I think he always found himself playing second fiddle to her. He always found himself overshadowed by her. Whatever card he played, she seemed to trump. And I think he must desperately have hoped that divorce would somehow put an end under this awful story. Of course, it didn't. It didn't. Only her death did.
Charles no longer had to share his elderly grandmother's popularity with the public.
I think that what has happened to him is a genuine tragedy, because I think for many years his work was completely ignored, and the sort of person he was twisted and perverted by the media.
The press had long tracked Charles's friendship with an attractive Australian, Lady Dale Tryon, an old confidant from his bachelor days. He nicknamed her Kanga and wrote her many letters. But tragically, within a few weeks of Diana's death, she died in hospital following an operation. Dale Tryon had been wheelchair-bound after falling out of a clinic window the previous year.
The Dale Tryon that I knew was in some ways a wonderfully exuberant and really delicious personality, and in latter years quite a sad woman. Dale's whole identity was caught up in having been a confidant of the Prince of Wales. She was obsessed with the Prince of Wales.
Unlike Camilla, the other woman in Charles's life, Kanga ran a successful dress shop in London's Knightsbridge.
When Charles went back to Camilla, Dale hoped that he would have gone back to her as well, and he didn't. He and Dale remained friends, but that former intimacy had gone forever. And Dale and I had one very close friend in common who used to say to me, and has to remain nameless because she's so well placed that it would be impossibly embarrassing for her name to be used. But she used to say to me, "Oh, you know, Dale is still implying that she and Charles are still on. What do you think?" And I used to say, "Absolutely not. He's not on with her." But Dale went around implying to people that she was still a confidant long after she wasn't.
This is what we've done really well.
No, I love that.
In an exclusive interview shortly before her death, Kanga spoke of her relationship with Charles.
It's been a wonderful success, this neckline. Just because he happens to be Prince of Wales doesn't mean he's any different from lots of other friends. And I love my friends, and I love him a lot. But it's a very different thing saying you're in love with someone than that you love them. And my friends have been a wonderful, wonderful support.
Of the three women who loved Charles, only one survives. Camilla Parker Bowles is still a powerful force in Charles's life. She had become the mistress who will not go quietly.
Charles and Camilla can continue for the rest of their lives without getting married, and in some ways it will suit both of them better. He won't have the fuss that making her his wife will cause, and she will not be condemned to being a Princess of Wales, because believe me, to her it will be a condemnation. He always understood that anyone who became the Princess of Wales entered into a Mephistophelian bargain with the media and with the courtiers, that she was sacrificing her freedom, her independence, and to a large extent her individuality. He knew this. And Diana knew this because he told this to Diana, but Diana was too young to appreciate what she was really swapping and what she was really getting into. Camilla knows it. Camilla doesn't want it.
After her divorce, Diana resolved to leave the past behind. In the summer of 1997, she holidayed in Saint-Tropez with the family of Mohammed Al Fayed. Diana stayed in the Fayed sumptuous villa and cruised on their luxurious yacht. Among the party was Fayed's 42-year-old son Dodi, a film producer, with a well-documented interest in beautiful women. In the Saint-Tropez heat, Diana and Dodi fell in love. Their first meeting was captured on film in June 1988 at a polo match. At this time, Diana was still married to Charles.
I think Diana's affair with Dodi was the royal family's dream come true. You see, it suited the royal family for Diana to be wound down publicly and for Charles to be wound back up. And Diana was doing with Dodi what nothing else could have done. Had she lived, her relationship with Dodi would have been an answer to the royal family's prayers.
There were no happy endings. Diana and Dodi died after a Paris car crash on the 31st of August 1997. Her death and the incredible outpouring of grief forced the royal family to adapt to public opinion. Diana and Fergie had played a dangerous game and lost their status and titles. Diana's indiscretions began a chain of events which ended in the ultimate tragedy. 2 young boys lost their precious mother and will grieve for her all their lives. The Queen at 71 faces urgent changes in the royal family values she has accepted from the cradle. She had believed that the monarchy was a modern institution, evolving gradually with social changes. Now she knows that Diana's instincts and desire for reform were right. Even she admitted that lessons had to be drawn from Diana's death.
In this new emotional Britain, this sort of double reaction is the right thing. But he can only keep that up. He can only, as it were, oddly enough, be now the inheritor of all the sentiment that was directed at Diana. This is the extraordinary thing. He can only do it so long as he doesn't marry Camilla. Camilla, I think, is now permanently the mistress. She is now permanently behind the scenes. She will never become queen. She will never have a coronation. There will be always a ghost Queen Diana. By a deep paradox, Diana's death put her back into the royal family. She was buried underneath the standard of a royal highness, although the title had been stripped for her. Prince Charles behaved as though he was still married to her, and it's almost as though her death wiped out the divorce. She will always be Charles's wife. She will always be mother of the 2 princes, and in a funny kind of way, she's queen from beyond the grave.
She went home to Althorp, her family's ancestral estate, back to the Spencers whose forebears lie with her father in the nearby church at Great Brington, the village she knew as a girl. Diana is not there. She was buried away from public gaze on an island in the middle of a small lake at Althorp, where she played as a child. Her memory will be adorned by myth and fable and legend. Her death has shown that no one can predict the fortunes of the House of Windsor. Diana is finally at peace.